popular demand, I have Abhijit Iyer Mitra joining us again. If you missed our last show together, the link is above. Check it out. It was a really good show, and I'm looking forward to welcoming him back today. Abhijit ji, welcome.
Saloni ji, Joy Ma Durga, and thanks for having me.
My absolute pleasure. So there is still so much happening in the world. There's no peace for the wicked, as they say. Let's start with
Yes, alas.
Let's start with Africa. There's a lot of unrest going on there, especially with the recent coup in Niger. And it's quite interesting because it's there's ECOWAS, which is the obviously the African West African nations getting together at the moment in Ghana, because you've got the pressure from European countries, especially France, trying to put sanctions on the area, the region. The neighbors are now worried in case there's military intervention going to come in through ECOWAS. It's, old colonialist rules. These colonies have never really got their independence. They are still fighting against the old colonists. Can you give us some background and the latest on the ground there, please?
Yeah. So, if ECOWAS intervenes, it's not going to be the first time. They intervened some 6, 7 years back in the Gambia uh, against a coup. I would be very surprised, though, if ECOWAS goes up against Niger's forces, simply because Niger's forces are extremely well trained by the local standards, and they are also very big. So I don't think even a local superpower like Nigeria would be thinking about intervention very as a cakewalk of any sort. This is number one. Number two, though, we need to recognize that the chaps leading the coup just had the coup. It wasn't for any national interest or anything like that. It was purely because the president was going to get rid of a lot of them. And so, it was one of those things to stall being gotten rid of. The third thing we need to remember is that Nigeria is pushing a very ideological position on this. Normally, I'm not sure if this is the way ECOWAS would have reacted, but Nigeria has its first, not first, but say nth democratically elected president in a country that is very unstable for democratically elected presidents. So he sees this as the sort of, that's an entire coup belt. I think the next 3 or 4 countries east of Niger are all under military rule that's happened recently, starting all the way from Sudan down to Burkina Faso. So I think what's happening is, and this is just my understanding of things, that the Nigerian president is taking this very, very personally. And European sanctions, this is a routine we keep going through every time there's a coup, there's European sanctions. And then there's good dictators and bad dictators, you see. Al Qaeda wanting to fight Bashar al-Assad are very good Al Qaeda, but Al Qaeda wanting to fight the Americans in Afghanistan are bad Al Qaeda, etc., etc. Pakistan is good dictatorship, Thailand bad dictatorship. I mean, how uh, flexible these moral standards are. You remember Winston Churchill's old joke on the floor of Parliament when he said, though my parents took me to school, took me to freak shows very frequently. What a joy to finally meet the one exhibit that was missing, the spineless wonder on the floor of uh, Westminster. So it's one of those things. The spineless wonder exists in Europe. Nothing you can do about it. Nigeria's reaction is the most surprising of the lot. Uh, I know there's a lot of pushback within ECOWAS against Nigeria's ideological position. But look at it from the Nigerian point of view. If Niger falls and there isn't sufficient punishment, you will have an incentivization of a coup in Nigeria itself.
Mm,
And that is why Nigeria has cut off all power. And the problem is ham handed sanctions like this. How often have we seen this? They only affect the most vulnerable sections of society. Because the 10% of Niger's power that Niger produces by itself is all going for the elite. So it's the hospitals, the schools, the ordinary people that are suffering, not the coup making elites.
yeah. So basically, with that destabilized region at the moment, would it be like the way China has made headway in Africa, it's really kind of made its mark. But the beauty is that with India and African nations is that they've actually got a shared history of being under colonial oppression. Would it be a good time for India to get in there, do you think?
So India's problem is a very, dare I say it, an arcane, lethargic bureaucracy,
Really?
which doesn't want to pick up its game, limited resources with which to do it, too much intra-departmental conflict to maximize what happens. But when it happens, it's fantastic.
Yes.
Because you see, India, unlike China, follows the old European model, which is the old, as in, I'm not talking about European colonization, but post colonization model, which is give money where all the expertise and technology is all coming from back home. It's aid, but it's not aid spent on the local people. It's aid where the contractual obligations all have to be spent on the donor countries, industries, and things like that. And we know for a fact infrastructure by itself doesn't lead to
Yeah.
growth. It requires a regulatory environment, it needs human capital development and things like that on the ground for everything to come together. And yet they used to give them infrastructure saying, well, this is a debt trap, it's a fantastic debt trap to get you into, and screw you, that's it. The Soviets, of course, didn't understand economics at all. They were both a boon and a bane because they never taught economic planning to their client states in Africa, and they themselves never learned economic planning. So, I mean, that was a kind of a charity model, but not a very good charity model.
Right.
China follows the post colonial European model, which is selling them white elephants on which you don't have returns on income, returns on expenditure. And this is a model that India has fine tuned in Afghanistan and implemented in Africa as well, which is local manufacturing, local community engagement. Yes, a percentage of it is Indian experts coming, a percentage of it is going back to Indian industry, but it's mostly empowering the locals to start running these things. Even if that infrastructure does not lead to, say, economies of scale or other economies within uh, uh, say Tanzania or Uganda or whatever, at least the personnel for building and maintaining all these organizations, all this infrastructure is created in house in the target African state. Right? It's a fantastic model. The point is, how much can it be scaled up? How much resources does India have and is willing to spend? Niger is very important for us because we have significant uranium mines in Niger. I think Niger is one of India's most important uranium mine areas where nobody complains about the Indian investment there.
So basically, when a country has been given independence from their old colonizers, they never really got true independence, did they? Because, like for example, with France, as you say, the uranium mines, the mines that they have in Niger, there are gold mines next door in Mali, and France is actually still to this very day getting billions of dollars every year from at least 14 of their ex colonies. That was the contract that these colonies had to sign for independence. Which leads me on to recently, we've all been celebrating the Indian Independence Day, but there's always a blot on that day because it happened with partition and at least 3 million deaths. And something that The Guardian, now, The Guardian is quite a Hindu phobic, anti Indian newspaper. I very rarely agree with them. We actually did a protest against The Guardian. Actually, we did a video on that, so there's a link there. I'll find that for you. In The Guardian in May 2014, they wrote, "Today, 18th May 2014, may well go down in history as the day when Britain finally left India. The Congress Party was in many ways a continuation of the British Raj." They printed that the day that Modi ji and BJP came into power in 2014. Now, earlier this week, you actually tweeted Congress, a special purpose vehicle for the British Raj. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, sure. Should we do France, the Francophrique first, or British Raj first?
Entirely up to you.
Okay. So, the thing about Africa is it's always been a bit of a shades of gray area. I'm still not willing to accept that Africa doesn't have an alternate path, but I also accept that Africa has a lot of trouble uh, finding that alternate path. But that they should have the right to find those paths by themselves. See, there's nothing actually preventing these African states from ending that treaty. That's what Ghana, was it Ghana or who was it? Kwame Nkrumah was Ghana, wasn't it?
Kwame Nkrumah.
Uh,
I'm not sure.
yeah. Anyway, one of the French, I think the first French country, Francafrique, to leave the French orbit, voted for independence, and the French destroyed all the infrastructure, saying, well, these were all benefits of French
Yes.
civilization. Screw you.
Yes.
But tell me, why is it that all these countries feel the need to be attached to France when Vietnam, which suffered many more million deaths, did not, and is actually prospering very, very well? They're industrializing very rapidly,
Mm.
right? A lot of the problem also lies with the local leadership. Ultimately, it's their responsibility to free themselves, but they choose not to do. They choose to be in these contracts for the Central African franc and the East African franc. There's the CFA and another something, this thing, which, I mean, why do they need it? They can always move out of it. They choose of their own free volition not to move out of it. Right. We should remember the history. These are all artificial countries created with artificial borders that are not natural demarcations. And we should also remember historically, these are extremely, extremely violent places. The violence has been, say, exacerbated by modern borders, but they were certainly not terribly peaceful even before colonization. This notion of how all modern conflict is the outcome of colonization is just absolute rubbish. I don't buy that. Why is it that Africa as a continent refuses to modernize in the way, say, Asia has or South America has? Brazil has started emerging finally. Uh, Equitably, including their native ethnicities. Bolivia had ethnically Inca or Aymara, I think he was Aymara president, Evo Morales. And sure, I mean, there was a bit of demagoguery, but there was progress. Why is it that South Africa, that was the shining beacon, has all gone to smithereens? I think there's a lot for Africa to introspect about Africa. And I think blaming everything on the colonizer just doesn't work. So I think it's a lot of shades of gray with Africa where, I don't know which side of the argument to come down on. Because remember, the whites were just the last 1% of the slave trade. 99% of the slaving was done by Africans to Africans within. And this is standard. You look at it everywhere. Stalin killed more Russians than the German army did. Mao Zedong killed 7 times more Chinese citizens than the Japanese imperial army did. You know, uh, Human beings are nasty. Just period, human beings are nasty. But then let's come to partition, that other nasty, nasty thing that happened to us. So, in many ways, I see it as Good Friday, I guess. It's a horrible thing that happens, the crucifixion of Christ, but then something good comes out of it. I mean, opinions so divided on if it was good or not, but yeah, but I mean, no analogy is perfect, but you get it. So, I do believe that partition was the best that could have happened under the circumstances. Can you imagine, given the sort of feudal outlook of Sunni society in India, of Sunni society in Pakistan, uh, how horrifically violent multiplying that population. Right now, the Indian Muslim population is about 200 million. Undivided, it would have been something like 560 million or more. Uh, The Shia parts, I'm never worried about. The Shias are very, very modern. They've modernized as a society, as several societies. The Twelver Jafris have modernized, the Boris have modernized, the Daudis, the Ismailis, all of them have modernized. The Sunni polity has never modernized since 1757 and the Battle of Plassey in 1857 and the sack of Delhi. It's completely ossified in time. It's a whole bunch of people, exactly like Stalin or Mao, the analogies I gave you before. The Muslim leadership in India has been directly or indirectly responsible for more Muslim deaths than Hindus, Brits, and everybody else combined. Okay, they have condomized their own community. They use them as foot soldiers in a very feudal way for their own interests, where they reap the benefits of the deaths of average Muslim women, children, whatever killed in rioting. It is a very cynical, exploitative elite of their own society that are responsible for maximum damage to that society. They were as much a victims. Forget the fact that there were the shock troops and the foot soldiers that were used to terrorize. Many members of my family were killed on the Bengali side of the family. My grandmother's sisters, several of them were raped because they hadn't. My grandmother had moved to Jaipur, so nothing happened. Many of my uncles and aunts were killed. I mean, we don't even know. We don't even know where they were anymore. I mean, they knew which address to get in touch with in Jaipur, and if they didn't get in touch, we all know what that means. So it wasn't nice. But let's talk about what happened after that. A population exchange is always mixed with horror and terror and things like that. There's never been a smooth population exchange in history ever. But it did give us something good. It gave us breathing space. But what wasn't, and Bengal suffered more than Punjab for a reason. The average Punjabi refugee got somewhere between 2 to 3 times the amount of money that the average Bengali refugee got. Punjab saw a near exact population exchange of 5 million and 5 million. Bengal did not. Bengal got 2.6 million inflow and just zero point 0.6 million outflow. So it wasn't even an exact replacement. They were given less money. And then the cruelest thing in all of that was how Bengal was punished for being industrial, that even the refugees who came in were then financially destroyed by the government of independent India. Bengal's share of the budget from 20% of what it itself generated was brought down to 12%. On the eve of independence, on the 14th of August, this was what the cabinet of Jawaharlal Nehru passed. Then they brought in the freight equalization bill. Now, why did Bengal develop? Because it was close to all the steel and aluminium and all those mines in Bihar, Jharkhand,
And
and
that's where
places
the
like
East
that.
India
It was
Company
close to all
went.
the
Yeah.
jute. Yeah, it was close to all the jute and cotton growing areas in what is today Bangladesh. So it was the perfect entrepot for everything to come together, get processed, and exported out. Calcutta accounted for 40% of all shipping in and out of India. Okay, but the freight equalization policy completely negated the industrial advantages of Bengal, because it didn't matter if cotton had to travel 5 kilometers, 500 kilometers, or 5,000 kilometers. It was meant to be priced the same. That destroyed Bengal. Bengal went from being the most developed state of India in 1947 to officially being declared a backward state in 1972. What was done to Bengal by the Congress and Jawaharlal Nehru was exactly what was done to North Korea: complete systematic anthropogenic deindustrialization by a crooked, corrupt, inept family. So let's talk about that. We all know what the horrors of partition were, but let's talk about how the refugees of Bengal got screwed over, not once but two, three times over, and then again had to ensure ethnic cleansing because of all of this, had to go through ethnic cleansing again in 1971, where 8 million Hindu refugees came across the border, never went back and contributed, because by this time Bengal had been completely deindustrialized with a huge, and mind you, Bengal's population in 1947, West Bengal was 26 million. 2.6 million coming in is 10% of your population are refugees. 8 million Bangladeshi Hindus coming in 1971 means 16.6% of your population at that point of time were refugees.
So it's a bit of an oxymoron actually, because you said there's a pro with the partition with the Sunni Muslims, otherwise there'd be over 500 million in India right now. And then obviously there's a lot of cons. Just by what you say, the cons obviously outweigh the pros, right? Because if it hadn't been partitioned, there could be laws, there could be ways to regulate, control. I think the partition has caused a lot more trouble, a lot more division. I mean, apart from
I, I,
physical.
I would disagree. I think if partition hadn't happened, the Bengal genocide would have been the Indian genocide. The coups in Bengal and Bangladesh would have been coups in India. The failed state that is Pakistan today would have been the failed state of India. The Taliban and terror hub that is Pakistan today, the veritable emporia, the Harrods of terrorism, if you want to call it that, that is Pakistan today, would have been India. India would have had a border with Afghanistan, which would have been an interminal conflict. Our conflict with China would have been a lot worse. There would have been all kinds of things that no, I think on balance partition was the best thing that happened. It was the best in a whole set of bad options,
Right. Okay. That's actually quite.
or rather the least worst in a whole
Yes.
set of bad
Yes. No, I,
options.
I get what you're saying. Um, Talking about the remnants of colonialism, there are laws that are from the 1800s that are now going to be finally abolished. Can you give us a bit more insight about that?
Mhm. Not a big fan of it, by the
Okay.
way, because it's written in the English of the
Yes.
1800s. Okay, now you come up with a modern law. Why don't you just say what you mean and mean what you say? Right? If I want to say, hereforth on Chitty Media, we will not have Saloni with a blue dress ever hosting a program, just say
Mm.
that. Chitty Media, no Saloni in blue dress. Okay. Instead, what the law in the new BNS, replacing the Indian Penal Code IPC, says is noble broadcasting house that goeth by the name and hereforth be knoweth unto everyone as Chitti Media haveth said fair damsel hosting a fair program by the said name of Saloni, and weareth she azureth clothes, she shall not herewith be permitted unto hosting said program to be broadcast over digital waves in yonder blue clothes that mirror the eyes of that mirror the sky. What the hell, dude?
What thou art say, sire, I shall agree with. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. So, this is something we see in India where verbosity connotes profundity. Whereas for me, verbosity and farting go hand in hand. Verbosity equals farting. You don't know what you're talking about, which is why you're being verbose, or you don't have enough to say, which is why you're being
You're
verbose. You
blowing
just
hot air.
it's like the stuffing in the turkey or the chicken or whatever. You don't have enough chicken to go around, so you compensate by stuffing
Yeah.
it. So it's like that. It's such a verbose, obtuse. I'm actually a bit scared by it, not because it hasn't modernized the law, it has, but the language in which it's done it is open to intense interpretation,
Right. Okay. Hmm.
interpretational differences. Sorry,
That's interesting, actually, because laws should be set in stone, clear.
set in stone, and they
Yeah,
should
they
be
shouldn't be
clear.
ambiguous.
Sadly, the language of this does not provide for clarity.
Right. Interesting. Sticking to India, actually, there are riots. We have seen riots over the last few years more so, and each time, from the Delhi riots to the West Bengal riots to the current riots in Haryana, time and time again, it then comes to light that they are sponsored, they're funded, they're organized. Can you give us a bit more light about who these people are sponsoring, what their goal is? Is any resolutions, any light on the subject?
So, this is something that I think it was Lee Kuan Yew who wrote about. that when he landed in India, he was meant to be the chief guest at Republic Day or something like that. And he apparently asked Indira Gandhi, I picked up the newspaper today and everything was riot here, riot there, riot here, riot there. What the hell is happening? And without a batting an eyelid, she turned around and she said, this is like a pressure cooker. We keep letting small explosions happen here and there so that one big explosion doesn't happen. So, rioting in India is seldom spontaneous. Uh, there is a spontaneity to every riot, but there's also a lack of spontaneity to every riot because every time a riot happens, there's usually an interested group that wants to settle scores. So, for example, pogroms in Europe, right? Uh, you label, basically, you invoke blood libel against the local Jew. Uh, the anger is spontaneous, but the spark is deliberately lit.
Yes.
The rioting is largely spontaneous, but it's done to hide the crime. Like, Hercule Poirot's ABC murder, where only the A was the actual murder, the B and C were picked out of the telephone directory to confuse Hercule Poirot and Scotland Yard about the motive of that murder.
Right.
It's like that. The pogrom hides the money lender and his family to be killed off so that the money lender does not have to be paid back again. And that is what you see with a lot of rioting in India.
Yes.
Right. In this case, what you see in Manipur is lots of things coming together. A very concerted attempt to change the demography of the region. A lot of sort of sustenance to terrorism there by the church out there. A lot of foreign money coming in. A lot of foreign arms coming in. The fact that the majority communities there do not want what is now the Hindu minority to be given reservation anymore.
Right.
Right. Now you get to demand reservation. You can't say that somebody else can't
Mm.
be given reservation. So it was kind of the thing. And this comes about because the court directs the local government to ensure reservation for the mighties. Just like the entire Delhi riots started off because the court at that time, under an Assamese who was under a severe conflict of interest, demanded that the CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act, and the National Register of Citizens be enacted in his home state of Assam, where he had personal gain.
Right.
All right. But remember, even those Delhi riots, we're told about Shaheen Bagh being very peaceful. Rubbish. Shaheen Bagh, this is a continuum of violence where they want you to focus on the for show peaceful bit. And like we spoke about pogroms, which were done to hide the killing of the moneylender, Shaheen Bagh was the foil. I'm a gay guy, so I have a beard when I go to a party, which is a pretty lady to accompany me along to pretend. Yeah, she's my wife, man. She's like whatever, whatever. She's my girlfriend. She my chick. Yeah, yeah, man. Like, yeah, football talk in the locker room, bro. Kind of crap. I'm sorry. I've never been in a football room, so I don't know what bro talk is and all that crap. But I'm assuming from Hollywood movies, this is what happens. Anyway, so what they do is it started off at a place called Selampur, which is where the rioting broke out. It was extremely violent. Then there was rioting in Jamia Millia Islamia. The police went in to teach the rioters a lesson, and then they suddenly formed a human shield and suddenly, overnight, within the space of 2 hours, claimed that they were peacefully protesting,
Mm.
essentially to protect the rioters in their midst, and as and when required. See, this was a safe haven from which the terrorists could hide and then go out to do riots, and come back and hide and go back to do riots, which then became the Delhi riots.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So, my friend Gunja Kapoor, she was abducted by these people, held hostage, abused, her phone was stolen, whatnot.
God.
To date, nobody has arrested the people who kept her hostage for 6, 7, 8 hours, stole her phone, slapped her around, whatever. And then they claim they have nothing to hide, and all she was doing is wearing a burqa and making videos.
Wow. Goodness me. Gosh. And with all these riots, like I remember with the farmers' protests, there's a lot of outside money coming in to break India. I remember the pop singer Rihanna, she was paid like $2 million to tweet against the BJP government and their farmers, and the farmers. And it's like there's a lot of funding and breaking India forces going on. But what I've noticed is that usually the rioting somehow is always pinned on Hindus above all the other religions that are involved. Why?
Yeah. Look, it's narrative. I think a lot of it has to do with the nature of the BJP. Essentially, the BJP is the party of the middle classes, the classes emancipated by Narasimha Rao's economic reforms in 1991, individually liberated. And so they are a bit crude at expressing themselves. They're not very articulate. They don't play that high level game that so called intellectuals play. I mean, let's face it, The Guardian is essentially a glorified public toilet. I've been to public toilets in India that smell better than The Guardian's editorial pages. But The Guardian has an aura of intellect, self conferred intellect, right? So it's like every dictatorship that identifies as the People's Democratic Republic of. It's what Voltaire said about the Holy Roman Empire. Of course, Voltaire was an idiot, but that's a different matter. It was neither holy nor Roman, not an empire. I think if you go back into Germanic history, you'll know exactly why it had to be named the Holy Roman Empire. But let's put it down to Voltaire being an idiot. But let's face it, no People's Democratic Republic has ever either been People's Democratic or a republic in any sense of that word. So this is Guardian's intellect like that. This is Haaretz in Israel's intellect like that. This is the Washington Post to the New York Times intellect like that. The problem is a lot of our population is Anglophone and they seek validation in Anglophone media, right? But it affects all of them. Like in Delhi, for example, you have two French magazines, Le Monde and Le Figaro. Now, Le Monde, we know, is the Guardian. It's the public toilet of Paris. Le Figaro, which is run by Dassault, which is the Mirage and Rafale makers' family, Serge Dassault's family, is meant to be right of center. And yet their correspondents in India are the same kind of Guardian and Le Monde approved lefty schmucks who have a vested interest, who can't speak a word of Hindi, who do not understand local nuance, who depend on local handlers who are ideologically selected to report back home to their French audiences. What do you do in that case? I've had people from Agence France Presse saying, look, I went and covered it. The point is, I can't write a contrary story because it'll seem like an attack on my colleagues. So there is an omerta code out there. There is this thing that you need to conform. And this is what I find most surprising, that these people claim to be the voice of democracy and dissent, and yet they are the most intolerant towards democracy and dissent.
Yes. No, absolutely. I want to.
For them, for them, dissent is what they certify as dissent. Anything that disagrees with them is fascism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia. You name the gripe of the
Yes.
day, and I'm sorry, my boy wants attention. So yes.
Which one? Hello. Oh, sweet. Oh, he's adorable. Oh, he's gorgeous. So basically, with all these riotings, the opposition party seems to want to politicize it. So recently we had Modi ji being, the vote of no confidence, and how they're always, speaking up against Modi ji. That seems to be the only thing that they do. Yet there's so many human rights violations happening, especially like against Hindus, Hindu women in particular, where they're quiet.
Yeah.
It's like radio silence.
Look, it's. Notice they're not just quiet about attacks on Hindus. They're also quiet on the actual macro issues. They blame everything on Hindus, but they don't blame it on the macro issues that have persisted till today, which is what? A completely corrupt and rogue judiciary that legislates unto itself, that assumes legislative power, that has concocted legal fiction over and above the constitutional mandate given to it. Uh, a police force that is we're thoroughly under policed. Our police is undertrained, and even the basic accountability mechanisms like body cams and things are not given. Why? To allow the police to remain corrupt. All right, because they suit a certain political agenda. Nobody wants to raise that. Okay, nobody wants to raise the fact that much of the feudalism that plagues India today is precisely because of your farm laws. It is because of your inadequate land reforms. We didn't have land reforms in this country, we had tenancy reforms. There's a big difference between tenancy reforms and land reforms, which, in India, in our love of elaborate language, sayest thou, beest thou, knowest thou, we forget about the actual things. We're more interested in form over function. So we call it land reforms when in fact it was the worst, most cynical kind of tenancy reforms humanly possible. So what do you do in situations like this? This is a corrupt elite trying to defend their corruption. It is them trying to explain away the fact that they have zero ground connect with the people of India, and they concoct stories about electoral fudging.
Yes. Well, talking about concocting stories, we've recently had NewsClick in the open now. We know that they were directed and funded by China. It's difficult actually because it's harder to control online press compared to, say, printed press. Do you think there are many others out there that are being funded? Obviously, we can't name them for legal reasons, but what do you reckon?
Hell yeah. There's something called, allegorically, assume it's something to do with money laundering. uh, uh, this particular news outlet gets money from Omidyar, who we know has huge investments in China. And there are several other news outlets that get money directly from George Soros, who also has all kinds of duplicitous investments in all kinds of duplicitous places, but he also has an agenda. See, he's much more dangerous than Omidyar because Omidyar is somebody I would describe as a sort of ideological prostitute. He'll go where the money is. Soros is a true believer. And always fear the fanaticism of a neoconvert.
Hmm. He's a true believer with a lot of money as well.
Yes.
Going on to a lot of money, Pakistan, it's in turmoil at the moment. Imran Khan has been in prison for 3 years. There is rumors saying it's America's job that did that because he was very neutral on Ukraine. I mean, what do you think? Have the US played a part in this?
No. And I'll tell you why. It's very easy to blame the US for things like this. There are things where you can blame the US, like Maidan and the so called revolution, the Maidan revolution in Ukraine, which America has a direct impact on, where we have a lot of proof of that for, say, removing Salvador Allende in Chile and several other coups, Mossadegh in Iran and things like that. Not for this. Because if you actually read the transcripts between Donald Liu and his Pakistani interlocutor, who was the ambassador, I think, in Washington at the time, Donald Liu is complaining. Okay. And he's telling them, and these are very normal diplomatic conversations. So, for example, I know for a fact before we abrogated, rather amended Article 370 for Kashmir, there was a lot of interaction with local ambassadors and things like that, where they were telling us how to go about it so that it would minimize the impact of their government sanctioning us or anything like that. So, knowing how diplomatic conversations take place, it requires a complete diplomatic ignoramus to blame America for what happened to Imran Khan. Imran Khan went down because Imran Khan threatened the Pakistan army. There's nothing more to it. And the Pakistan army got rid of him because he was sowing dissension within army ranks, which has never happened
Yeah,
before.
it's just there was some parallels because there's Pakistan elections obviously at the end of this year, and plus Donald Trump is being
Yeah.
indicted, how conveniently, when he should be campaigning. So you just, that's why I assumed it might be the USA. But you've mentioned Kashmir actually. Pakistan are living on handouts, they don't have their own money anymore. How do you think that's going to now affect what their sponsorship is in Kashmir, the Khalistani movement? What do you think is going to happen to those?
Look, it's already affecting the. You can see Kashmir has virtually been pacified. I never expected it to be pacified so soon, but it is now pacified completely. Will there be one or two terror attacks every year? Sure. There's nothing you can do about the lone wolf terror attack. That one planned attack, you can file 100, they just have to succeed once. And that's that. uh, you can't prevent that from happening. So, I mean, that you can't prevent from happening anywhere in India, and it's going to be the same frequency as the rest of India, no more, no less. Khalistan is a much more interesting proposition because remember, when the Khalistan insurgency started off, Pakistan was the rich neighbor and India was the poor neighbor. India was very close to bankruptcy in 1990, 1991, which is why Narasimha Rao did all those reforms and stabilized the economy. The problem is, what has happened since then is Punjabis who have immigrated to Canada and the UK have become a very high disposable income community, number one. At the same time, Pakistan has become a beggar. But more importantly, what has happened is governments in Canada and the UK, in the name of not interfering in community affairs, have essentially thrown their local Sikh populations to the wolves by allowing the violent uh, 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 community leaders to essentially feudalize the community under them. I can tell you for a fact, Sikhs in Canada, I know so many Sikhs in Canada and the UK who live under terror that if they don't rock up to an anti India protest or something, something will happen to them.
Yeah.
And I faced this firsthand, thankfully, not directly, but my first day when I moved south from, I used to live in a place called Port Douglas in far north
I
Queensland.
know, I've been
I
there.
moved
I've
down
been there.
to
That's where the Barrier Reef is,
lovely,
right?
gorgeous place. Exactly right. And that's where I got my pilot's license and my diving license because I lived on the beach. So I literally used to wear my swimsuit and go out diving
Amazing. Did you do
from
your PADI?
my
Did you do the
house.
PADI course?
Yeah, yeah, I'm actually a dive
Ah,
master.
I
I've
only
come
did my
down to,
initial.
okay, so I've now come down to rescue diver because you have to pay party to maintain dive master, which is the first professional notch. So I'm still a rescue
Yes.
diver. Um, But what happens is when I moved down there, Melbourne, I go to, I'm like, yay, I'm finally getting Indian food stores because in far north Queensland, there are no Indian food stores. Maybe there are now, they were then. Um, so I go to a Tamil store and I'm so happy that I'm starting to speak in Tamil. The shopkeeper just jerks me aside and he says, Sir, could you please be very careful when you speak Tamil? Because if you speak Tamil, the LTT will rock up at your door. And it turns out the people who were staying in the flat before me were Tamils who moved out because they couldn't deal with the kind of extortion and harassment the LTT were doing in Melbourne. They would come and say, they would find out everything about your family. And then they would come and say, well, guess what? We know where your family is. If you don't keep paying us this much to continue the liberation struggle in Sri Lanka, we're going to kneecap your mom, we're going to kneecap your dad, etc., etc., etc.
Wow.
And very frequently they would carry it out. Now, and this was, of course, before the LTT were crushed by Rajapaksa, justifiably so. Because remember, the LTT killed more Tamils than Sinhalese ever did. Never forget that. Uh, uh, but if you come to this, the Khalistani situation out there, they've essentially been thrown to the wolves under these rapine, vicious, nasty feudal leaders who use the community to further their own personal agendas. And it's something you just can't prevent. What would a Punjabi family sitting in Punjab do? Live in squalor and drug addiction here because because of the insurgency, Punjab missed out on that cycle of industrialization that happened from 1991 to 2000. That that's a missed generation, so they never industrialized. The attempt to modernize the farm laws meant even the defeudalization of society could not happen because the farm laws were then scrapped last year. So what are you left with? You then go off to Canada. So what would you rather do? Have a secure future with government funded drug rehab, uh, even though you have to come out and protest and go burn a few cars every now and then, as opposed to living in India with no future at all. So it's and this is a lot of the opposition to the farm laws had to do with that. Unless you maintain an oppressive feudal environment run by the same people running the community out
Yes.
there, incidentally, the feudal oppressors here, who are the Judge Sikhs, are also the ones who are terrorizing the Sikh community in Canada and the UK. They need to maintain that oppressive rule here so that they can get fodder to run their politics in UK and Canada.
Do you know what? This is real news to me. I've not heard of this, and I'm quite active, so I'm hoping a lot of the audience have really woken up with this because I didn't know that was happening in the West. Um,
It
yeah, I did.
does. It does. I would really recommend you make friends with the worst kind of Khalistani you can find, and quietly, the poor ones, and then go into their houses and catch them off guard and have a genuine heart to heart with them.
Wow.
I have several friends who are forced to be Khalistanis in public, who fear for their lives in private because they don't know what will happen to them. And they know both the RCMP and British police are so corrupt and crooked. They will do absolutely nothing if anything happens to their families. It will be written off as culturally relative policing.
It's an eye opener, Abhijit. That really is. Moving now to next year's elections, the 2024 elections. As we said, all the opposition parties, the one thing they're united on is getting rid of Modi ji. They don't really have any policies to develop India or anything of substance. It's just we need to kind of get rid of him. That is their main focus. And
Yeah.
so there's something coming that they're talking about, seat sharing, where yeah,
Yeah.
so it's to in order not to split the vote. So there's more chance of them. Hopefully for them, they want to get rid of Modi ji, and we certainly don't want that. But apparently, I don't know if it will work mathematically. And also, Modi ji seems very unperturbed by this. I mean, does he know something we
Yes.
don't know? I mean, can you give the audience, a bit more of the permutations of this?
Yeah. So look, imagine I were Modi. I think if I were Modi, my third most important campaigner after myself and my deputy Amit Shah would be Rahul Gandhi. Nobody does more for the BJP votes than Rahul Gandhi opening his mouth. Okay, which is why I think they were quite happy with the Supreme Court overturning the conviction and sending him back to Parliament, because they finally have somebody. Mind you, the Supreme Court overturning the conviction happened after the announcement of India. Okay, why? Because I think they would have been happy with the conviction before India happened. I.N.D.I.A. But after it was announced, they said, "Oh no, we can't lose our prize racehorse, so please get him the hell out of jail." Okay, I think this is what happened. Number one. Number two, you know, synergies on paper don't translate into synergies in real life. There's a high possibility here of negative synergies coming into play. And by synergy, you mean where 2 plus 2 equals 5. And negative synergy is where 2 plus 2 equals 2. And that's a big issue with this alliance, because it will be seen as the alliance of the corrupt and the crooked, number one. Number three, in any contest of ideologies, the left has a chance. But in any personalized contest where it's Modi against XYZ, when you don't even have a face to project, it's Modi against Mr. Invisible. Who in their right mind is going to vote for Mr. Invisible? The fourth thing that we've seen is this is a national phenomenon now where people are more than willing to vote overwhelmingly for a different party in state elections and a completely different party, completely antithetical to the party they voted in state elections in the national elections. Which is why in Delhi, for example, the AAP walks away with all the assembly seats and they lose all the parliamentary seats. Right? In Bengal, Mamta walks over most of the assembly seats, but in the parliamentary seats, you'll again see the BJP win quite a bit. Reduced now for the BJP's own mistake because they had donkeys leading the charge out there. That's a different matter. Uh, you will see this across the board. So I have no hesitation in saying Modi is going to win the next election with an absolute majority. The only question is how big is that absolute majority going to be?
Yes. You mentioned obviously you're from from the Tamil area, and they've recently had a BJP new leader, a young man, Annamalai. So, do you now see them doing well there in the general elections, and then following the next state elections? And possibly the whole area may be tanning saffron. What do you think of a saffron surge in the area of South India?
I think Annamalai himself has said that he's not working to a 5 year plan, he's working to a 10, 15-year plan. I don't think the BJP's messaging in Tamil Nadu is correct right now, because Tamil Nadu is that one state where caste is still important, and Hindutva is about overcoming caste. It's about ending caste and creating Hindu unity, that you see yourself as a Hindu first and not as a Brahmin, a Shudra, a Dalit, an OBC, an SC, ST, whatever first. Right? So, that is not a message that is resonating in Tamil Nadu right now, especially because you have two large land owning backward castes at each other's throats, the Kaundars and the Devars. I do believe that Annamalai is the wrong community. He's a Kaundar. Traditionally, you'll find Devars were probably much more supportive of the ADMK, which is also the ones that are less anti Hindu and therefore more willing to vote for the BJP.
Okay.
I don't think we'll see. I will be very happy to be proven wrong on this, but my personal expectation is not very high for the BJP from Tamil Nadu at any rate. Kerala, I have high expectations because what Anil Antony, the son of the former chief minister, has done is he's brought a lot of the Christian vote, which is already sitting back and not voting for the Congress or CPIM in the last election, now coming out and saying, well, hey, if Anil Antony can go over to the BJP, and the BJP is going around meeting church fathers and leaders and pastors and all of that, and if all the northeastern states which are Christian are willing to vote for the BJP, why the hell should I vote BJP?
Mm.
Right? So it's one of those things which is very up in the air, but Kerala, I think the BJP will do better than in Tamil Nadu.
Okay. Interesting. Only time will tell, I guess. We can only speculate for now.
Yeah.
Talking of those elections, there's also big elections happening in the US, and a gentleman who is popular in the polls saying all the right things. He's more politer, cerebral, he's more sophisticated than Donald Trump, Vivek Ramaswamy. He's a bright man, he's authored many books, and he's been catapulted into the limelight. This time last year we hadn't really
Yeah.
heard of him. There's only two reasons that happens to a politician. Either his sheer genius, his brilliance, he's a selling author, or he's been sponsored. Which do you think it could be?
I think to get there, you have to be a bit of both. I'd like to think that there is a faction that wants disruptive change without the acridity of Trump's rhetoric. And I think that is where the vote is converging around Vivek Ramaswamy. It is a vote that is genuinely in awe of his intellectual capability, but sponsored by right thinking Republicans who see that this is a way of breaking the mold, going in for an ultra minority that will vote Republican as opposed to a large Muslim section which will never vote Republican, that is essentially condomized and feudalized by American politicians, much like their ancestors were in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, wherever, what have you, uh, who is not as acrid as Trump, but is as unyielding, sharp, and disruptive as Trump mentally, or even more so. Who is not easy to drag down with personal insults and things like that, who has an exemplary family life, and isn't seen as an institutional stooge like DeSantis. Because I don't think DeSantis is an institutional stooge, but there was a lot of the Trump voter base that feared that he was not going to be disruptive enough and wasn't going to clear the swamp. So I think Vivek is the perfect balance, but I don't think he can win the election because him being brown and especially being a Hindu, never underestimate the Hindu phobia.
Well, I was going to come on to that because they've had Brown, they've had Obama, but Vivek Ramaswamy, he is a practicing Hindu. He is a vegetarian, which is a real feat, especially 20, 30 years ago in America to be. And he's also given his sons Hindu names. There's a lot of Hinos, I call them, Hindu in name only people abroad that give their kids westernized names. He's named his sons Karthik and Arjun, beautiful Vedic names. And he does wear his Hinduness proudly on his sleeve. And about 58% of the Republicans are Christian evangelists. And I've been watching his campaigns, and he's proud to bring that Hinduness out with the parallels of the Christian qualities of humanity, service, and society, and he's winning them over. So I think watch this space. I mean, but do you really not think they are ready for a Hindu? Because even here in the UK, we thought they wouldn't be ready for a Hindu prime minister, but
Well, the UK isn't ready for a Hindu prime minister. He did win an election.
he hasn't won an election. That's
Uh,
correct. But our elected
he's
MPs
he's
elected
he's
him.
riding off Bojo's victory. I will believe the UK is ready for a Hindu prime minister if he wins the next election. Also, remember, while Rishi does a lot of white conservative talking points, he was absolutely silent during the Leicester riots. He never spoke up for the Hindus of
Mm.
Leicester. So, I treat him with a bucket load of salt. Uh,
I mean,
uh,
those Leicester riots did happen when he just first came into power, but only a couple of days ago,
and
Indian Independence Day,
and he did
and
nothing.
he did nothing. I think
And
he
he
was
did
still
nothing.
trying to establish himself because a lot of people were in uproar that he got in unelected. But only a couple of days ago, during Indian independence, he came to a Ram Katha here, where he said, "I am here as a Hindu and not as a prime minister." Now that went viral. People were up in arms saying that it's on the radio stations here. What does he mean by he's a Hindu and that? And it's just, I think it's sometimes just a matter of time. So
Kissing babies is the easy part of being prime minister. Protecting babies is the difficult part of being prime minister. He's going to the Ram Katha and kissing babies. Essentially, that's what it was. Uh, Great. When the test was protecting Hindu babies in Leicester, he failed
yeah,
miserably. That's no protector
yeah,
to me,
there's no denying. You're correct.
right? So I'm not exactly. I was more excited about Bojo than I ever was about Rishi Sunak.
Right.
I and the family itself are a bunch of social climbers. The son, for example, that is to say, his brother-in-law, Rishi Sunak's brother-in-law, funds the most vitriolic Hindu-phobic trash in America.
Oh.
Why? Because they want something named after them. The name recognition of being associated with something.
Mm.
So this is this social climbing tendency. I always doubt social
Mm.
climbers. I will never be at the same level as Mukesh Ambani or Ratan Tata or Anand Mahindra or whatever, but I don't begrudge them their wealth. Okay, I'm very happy. Do I think I deserve to have a wide body Boeing personal jet that can take me from point A to point B like that? Do I deserve to have a Rolls Royce Phantom driving me around? Yes. Do I deserve to have 100-carat diamonds around my neck? Yes. Do I have it? No. Am I going to begrudge somebody else for having it? No. My worry always is about social climbers who want all of that, and even after getting that, feel the need for social validation. The need for social validation is a huge alarm sign in my book.
Yeah.
I would rather go to bed with a king cobra than ever touch a social climber, allow a social climber into my house.
That is beautifully said, actually, and that is very dharmic because we understand with karma, they've got their wealth, but with it comes greed. They want the power. And so you've kind of articulated that beautifully, that there are the social climbers. But just going back to America, we are seeing a lot of dismantling going on there, more than ever, actually, with the economy and more so with thought leadership. The wokeism on the extreme left of the Democrats seem to have really taken over. And we've seen some ridiculous advertising, like with household names. We have recently had Bud Light, and they used a transgender woman, and they ended up losing 400 million in sales because they're pushing wokeism on a public that doesn't want it. What is going on
Yes.
in America?
What you're seeing is essentially Maoism and Stalinism through other means. masquerading as democracy. I never thought I'd see 1984, George Orwell's 1984,
Mm.
actually live that.
Yeah.
Mao coming to power happened before my time. Stalin and Lenin coming to power happened before my time. America is what happens when the Bolsheviks take over or the Chinese Communist Party takes over, not militarily, but through the ballot box. What is happening today in America is what Hugo Chavez ultimately did to Venezuela and Venezuela's people and Venezuela's economy. Okay, you have this thought police that is going to tell you what you can think, when you can think. uh, uh, Facts are not facts, freedom is not freedom, slavery is freedom, etc., etc., etc. State control over everything. Equality of input is not enough, equality of output is required, etc., etc. Let's face it, it's no longer the United States of America, it's the Union of Soviet Socialist American Republics.
Yes. I mean, like, at the moment, it seems if you're in the queue and you say a wrong thing, you can be prosecuted. And we've seen it
Mhm.
actually in California with the recent caste legislation that, most Hindus don't want, but at the left's behest,
which was
they're pushing
pushed
it.
which was pushed by an Afghan woman who's more concerned about Hindu caste than about what her own fellow people are doing to their women in California.
Yes.
You also, and here the thing is, to be fair to the Americans, it is still at the stage of social and financial, and career ruination through lynch mobs, online lynch mobs. In Britain, we've gotten to the criminalization of speech. You saw that poor autistic girl who was arrested for 22 hours because she told the policewoman that, I think she's a lesbian, she's got a girlfriend,
Oh,
and she
yes.
lives with her
Yes.
lesbian girlfriend.
Yes.
Have any of those cops been disciplined for that? No. Imagine arresting people for speech. We were very clear about these things. Arrests happen for actions, not for speech.
Hmm.
The only speech that you arrest for is incitement, which in America is the Brandenburg Principle, which is specific threat against a specific individual or group. The reason why this poor autistic girl was arrested was obscene.
Yes.
And mind you, this happened under Rishi Sunak. Are you seeing the Tories do anything to stamp out wokeism? The worst hive of wokeism is the BBC. Have you seen the Conservatives defund the BBC? Why not?
Yes.
And this is why I said I do not trust social climbers. Uh, Ultimately, birth speaks for itself. I know it's a horrible thing to say, but unfortunately, with Rishi and the family that he's married into, um,
Hmm.
not my cup of tea.
Understandable. You've justified it really well. Just going back to India, there are some new laws coming out about data protection. Can you give us some of the pros and cons with that? Because I know you're not a fan of the new law change for the old 1800s, but what about this one?
Well, I would if I understood the law. I've been trying to read it and figure out the implications of it. But again, the language is just so irritating. I'm still waiting for more clarity. Let's put it that way. When I get clarity, I'll call you and say, Saloni, let's do a podcast on this.
Sounds good. Sounds good to me. Finally, I'm just going to take you back to 2024 elections in India. Abhijit ji, you love Bharat, you love India, and you're a proud Hindutva. What is your message, you personally? We value your opinions, to the youth of India that maybe can't articulate their love for the country. They want to see India develop. They want to see Bharat succeed. They, some people will be voting for the first time, some of the youth. What is your message to them?
Celebrate India. Sure, you don't feel fulfilled or your ambitions and aspirations met as fully as it could, but it is met substantially. Be thankful for what you have, aim for a lot more. For every flaw you see in India, make a determination that you will fix that particular flaw. And most importantly, never cast a negative vote. Think of it as who can improve the country better, but at the same time also vote to keep out negativism. Look who's talking about hate, 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 and more hate, and look who's talking about growth, 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 and more growth. It's just that simple.
Abhijit, thank you. It's been such a pleasure, as always, with you. Given
Always,
it really is.
Saloni ji.
I mean,
Thank you
you're
so
a man
much.
that's in popular demand, so it's always an honour to steal some of your time.
Did you just presume my gender?
Did I? A man?
Ah, oh my
Well,
god. Did you just presume
what are
my
you
gender?
identifying with right now?
So it's 9:45 p.m. Indian Standard Time. Between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. Indian Time, I identify as a half unwrapped lollipop.
As a lollipop who... Thank you.
As a half unwrapped
As a
lollipop.
half unwrapped. What about a half eaten? That makes it more exciting, right? Shows that you're tasty.
No, but see, that's after 10 p.m. I'm a half eaten, fully
I
unwrapped
see.
lollipop.
Okay.
From 9 to 10 p.m., you have to respect my pronouns and refer to me as a half unwrapped lollipop.
Abhijit, it's been a pleasure.
You see the absolute ludicrousness of pronouns.
I know, it's crazy. They for a singular. Oh, it's very confusing. And this is with what I mean.
Zay, them, zer.
Wokeism is
Do you know it's
crazy.
actually, you can identify as a furry, and apparently there's cake and cake self.
Goodness. Well, on my lazy days and I don't feel like working, I identify as my cat, as a cat. I'm just sleeping in.
That's a good one.
Abhijit, it's
Yeah.
been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to our next podcast together. Jai Shri Ram.
Thank you, Saloni ji. Lovely talking to you. Joy
My
Madhu.
pleasure. Thank you.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.